Hey guys, welcome back to Who, What, Where, a true crime podcast. We're your hosts, Caitlin,
Hannah, and Abigail.
If you've never listened before, just know this is a very chatty girls' night sleepover type podcast. We will speculate and theorize a lot, so if that's not your jam, we totally understand. But if it is, you can tune in every Monday for a full-length episode, and then come back every Friday for a Freaky Fast Friday episode, where we give you the rundown on a case, sometimes unsolved, always freaky, in 30 minutes or less. So this week we're going to be talking about a case that if anybody is a Criminal Minds fan like I am, it kind of like, I couldn't believe that this one was based off a real case. I know a lot of Criminal Minds like episodes are based off or like very loosely based off of real cases, but this was one that I was like, I remember watching the Criminal Minds episode and I was like, there's no way that this like was real.
As a Criminal Minds fan, I'm excited
and here's the thing, like the facts of this case are not quite as like, you know, dramatized as the case in Criminal Minds. Yeah, like it's not quite like that crazy, but you know, it's still kind of, it's like, it's an interesting idea, but it's like, it's one of those ideas where it's like, this is crazier than fiction, kind of, you know, like it's too crazy to be true, but it's also too crazy to not be true, if that makes any sense. But yeah, anyway, so today's killer is named Robert William Pickton. He is also known as the Pig Farmer Killer. He is often referred to as Willie. I think this was like a nickname of his. I think I mostly refer to him as Willie in the podcast. So just so everybody knows, that's who I'm talking about as the main guy. He was born October 26, 1949. He is a former pig farmer from Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. This is about 17 miles east of Vancouver.
I was just going to say, emphasis on former pig farmer.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, he's in prison.
For some reason, I thought that was funny when you're like, he's a former pig farmer. And I'm like, thank God.
And convict. it does sound kind of silly. I feel like kind of like, it was, he's funny. Like, he's retired.
He's retired in prison.
He moved on with his life.
He's knitting in prison. No, they don't give him knitting needles.
Dude, you can kill a guard with a knitting needle.
You can kill anyone with a knitting needle.
You can only do the like finger knitting where do you know
our
like
knitting?
the big blankets?
Our knitting.
Robert William Pickton's making one of those like giant yarn blankets in prison as we speak. He's somebody's wife for sure because he's a punk ass bitch. So Robert William Pickton was convicted in 2007 of the second-degree deaths of 6 women. He is also likely responsible and like is the prime suspect of the first-degree murders of 20 other women, but these trials were stayed like indefinitely on August 4th, 2010. So he probably will never be charged for these, but it's like very well understood in the law enforcement community that he did these, if that makes sense. So little is known about Willie's childhood. His mother, Louise, raised him and his siblings alone on the pig farm. She expected them to work long hours, helping with caring for the animals. Even on school days, she would like have them get up and like feed the slop to the pigs and like clean pens out. Like that, like they had to do it the first thing they woke up, then they went to school in the middle, got home, immediately did more chores. So they worked pretty hard even as like small children. Pickton reportedly would hide from people by crawling inside of gutted pig carcasses. Like this was like a favorite hiding spot of his.
Wow.
Yeah. I think from here on out, I'm going to call him Pickton because Willie sounds like way too like whimsical.
Willie.
So we're going to refer to him as Pickton. So Pickton would also tell family friends a story of a time his parents slaughtered a favorite calf that he had raised himself. It seems like this had like affected him very severely. Like,
yeah, it probably would.
Yeah. They don't sound like they were the best parents. Pickton was slow in school, and after years of special education classes, he quit like halfway through high school. He was well known for having really bad personal hygiene, and he had very little luck with dating. Even in his adulthood, a close friend of his would constantly remind him to bathe himself when he became too rank to tolerate. So like essentially he smelled like pigs all the time, you know, like because pigs don't smell good at all. They like bathe in mud. And he, for whatever reason, had really bad personal hygiene. And it could have a lot to do with like
his mental state.
Yeah, his mental state. And so apparently he only took baths. And apparently this had a little bit to do with when he was a kid, his mother always insisted on bathing him instead of him taking a shower. Obviously it like stopped when he hit puberty, but like as a child, she like never wanted him to, as a teenager, she didn't want him to take showers. She like insisted on baths.
That is weird.
Thought that was like a weird little tidbit.
Seems like something that would kind of fuck you up as your parents making like your bathing decisions for you.
Yeah, like, well, and it's very specific. But as an example of the kind of mother Louise was, there's a story of a time that Pickton's older brother David hit a boy on the side of the road shortly after receiving his driver's license. So
a human in a car. He hit
a boy.
Oh gosh.
So Willie's older brother David was driving the like family's truck. He had just gotten his driver's license, and he hit this boy who was like walking along the side of the road. And when David went home and told his mother, she simply rolled the boy's injured but alive body into the ditch. So he was still alive. She like rolled him into the ditch, like down the side of the embankment. The boy later died from drowning in the water at the bottom of the ditch.
So she killed this kid.
Essentially.
They tag team killed this kid.
Yeah, well, because she was trying to shield David from
prosecuted.
It's a good question.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, nothing came of it, honestly. So there were some reports that his father, Leonard, had abused him, but this seems to be negated by his sister's accounts of their childhood. His sister says that, like, nothing like that ever happened. Like, there was never any, like, physical abuse of them.
Gotcha.
We know that Louise likely had a profound effect on Willie's upbringing, though. Especially, I mean, I can imagine that the event of her rolling the little boy down the embankment instead of helping him gave him a very interesting sense of right and wrong. Like, especially at a very formative age, you know?
Yeah, that's a very formative thing to witness.
Well, because, like, instead of calling the police, she, like, tried to just cover it up, essentially. So, I don't know. That seems like it would have a big effect on his, like, moral compass.
So, I don't see it as that, like, out of like character for a mother to want to like help protect her children like that in that way. But it wasn't like he was dead. Like, if he was dead, I could see like a mother doing that out of like panic and like love for her child. Yeah. But he wasn't dead.
That kid was
She should have gotten him help.
Yeah, it's actually pretty sad.
Yeah. I mean, not that covering it up would have been okay either way.
No, not at all. So in 1996, Pickton and his brother David began neglecting the farming aspects of the property, and they converted an old slaughterhouse into an event venue. It was known to host sex workers and the Hells Angels, and
oddly diverse group.
This was at the property, or it's like a farm, but not all of it was used as farmland. Like, some of it was just like empty land. It was at 953 Dominion Avenue. The parties they threw would sometimes attract like 2,000 people, and they called the event venue Piggy's Palace.
Oh,
drugs and alcohol were abundant, although Robert Pickton himself never partook in either. Like, he was well known as being like a very sober, straightforward guy, which could, like, you know, I don't know if you can really attribute that to any other part of his personality. Like, maybe he liked being in control. Maybe he went the other direction. He saw it as like a lesser, like you were lesser if you use drugs and alcohol, you know, as we'll get to in a second. So Port Coquitlam officials sued the brothers, David and Robert, in 1998 for misuse of the property. And after the Picktons, because I mean, obviously they should have had like some kind of commercial permit. I don't know a ton about property law in Canada, but I'm assuming they should have had some kind of license for holding giant 2,000 person events on this property.
Yeah, you have to have
Like
an
in
event
like
license.
insurance, they should have had insurance. Anyway, so they got sued in 1998. And after the Picktons held a New Year's party, like that same year, like after they got sued, the police filed an injunction, and this gave them permission to arrest anyone found at these parties. So like anybody that they could see going in and out of the property, like they could arrest them like automatically.
Well, that's kind of weird. But, okay.
The nonprofit that the brothers had been hiding behind was later disbanded after they could not produce financial statements. So they basically like applied for a nonprofit and were running all these events under like the guise of a nonprofit,
like charity gala where there's strippers.
Yeah, but they didn't have any
which is
actual
fine,
like
but-
financial statements at all.
Uh-oh.
My guess is the police. So Port Coquitlam. I saw it being referred to as POCO, like online, as probably because it's a little hard to say.
Yeah.
It's like a fairly small town, and so my assumption is that they just didn't like the kinds of people that these parties were attracting. That's
Very
probably the
likely.
only reason that they had an issue with it, honestly. So there's no evidence that David Pickton, this is Willie's brother, had any idea that his brother was doing all these crimes. There's like no indication that he knew about any of it.
Gotcha.
David himself actually denies that he knew anything about anything. He claims that all the crimes were committed and remains disposed of on parts of the property that were solely inhabited by Willie Pickton. So like, I think most likely they had like kind of divided up, like because the farm was left to all three of the siblings. My understanding is the sister did not live there. And then David and Willie kind of like, after they stopped using it as a farm, just kind of like one of them lived in one area, one lived in another area. So
Gotcha.
During a preliminary inquiry for his later crimes, it came out that Pickton had attempted to murder a sex worker in 1997. He brought her to his home, had sex with her, and then handcuffed her and stabbed her.
Oh.
Yeah. The sex worker said she had stabbed him back, and they were both later treated at the same hospital.
I'll go.
So, like, she stabbed him back in self-defense, and they ended up at the same hospital. The nurses actually used a key from Pickton's pocket to unlock the woman's handcuffs that she was still wearing when she got to the hospital.
What
the
in the
heck?
Canadian fuck? Like,
Wait,
yikes.
was this not like
Are
tried?
you reading the Criminal Minds episode? I'm just kidding. Actually,
Does something like that happen?
No.
Oh, okay.
But I was like, that sounds like it's a TV kind of thing.
I don't
so.
remember that much about the Criminal Minds episode where he's a pig farmer.
Is it the one that
The one he like
he's
feeds the
special
bodies to
needs?
the. Is he special needs? I don't remember.
I think that may be a different one.
Then it's like weirdly similar
I think that's
because like Robert Pickton was like
because
fairly
there is
slow.
one. Oh, and they find the thing full of shoes. That's a different one than
Yeah.
the one where he is like in the cave and he's special.
I know which one
Like
you're
he
talking
has
about.
a mental disability.
Yeah. In 1998, the attempted murder charge on the sex worker was stayed because the woman was deemed unfit to testify.
Huh?
She was a drug user and a sex worker, which technically was criminal. So she's technically a criminal. I think they just deemed that she probably wouldn't have compelling testimony, is my guess.
That's so weird. Because, I mean, even then, like, there is the hospital knows that she had been stabbed by him, right?
In his pocket to the handcuffs. Yeah. Is this still Canada?
So, yeah.
So I don't know how their justice system works, but what in the hell?
So in 2004, about 6 years later, the clothes that were put into evidence on the night of this crime were found to contain DNA from 2 other missing women. So other than the sex worker.
Hold on.
But again, this was several years later. So in 1999, there was a tip that there was human flesh in a freezer on the property. Some woman called and like an anonymous tip, and she was like, yeah, there's definitely human flesh on this property. You guys need to investigate. Nothing was ever done. Nobody ever went out to the property.
Is this still Canadian?
Yeah, nobody even like looked into it. So
That's so weird.
there was later a formal apology from Deputy Chief Constable Doug Lapard of the Vancouver Police Department to the victims' families for the mishandling of this case, as well as an apology for all the times that the police knew something was weird and did not look into it any further.
They should be sued.
There was several times when like nobody even really went and like asked if they could look around.
Well, and women after this died.
Yeah,
and those could have been prevented if they had investigated.
On one occasion, a police officer like even was granted permission by Robert Pickton to look around, and they didn't. Yeah, unfortunately.
I was gonna ask if you guys have ever seen the season of American Horror Story called Roanoke. Like, it's about...
No.
I've seen part of it. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there's this really creepy family, and I'm totally getting Robert Pickton vibes from that. So I wonder maybe if that was like loosely based off of this, but like it's similar that there's like pig farming and they're kind of all like creepy, like inbred, not all there. But they're all like, they're just like living their life fine and dandy because that's like all they've ever known.
So David and the sister, whose name for some reason I didn't write down, they seem pretty normal. Like, sure, they're kind of like hick and like backwoods, but like they seem pretty normal.
Yeah. So that's good. I guess.
Which means, I mean, which I think points to evidence that like the parents weren't that abusive or so abusive that it would explain Robert Pickton's behavior, in my opinion.
Or they were only abusive towards that child. Like, there's parents, like, I personally know, like, people who, like, have parents.
Well, he's the middle child.
They just didn't like one of their kids.
Yeah.
So, it happens.
That's true. Well, and, like...
Or maybe he was, like, not a child.
Not a ton is known about Robert Pickton's childhood, like I said. Like,
except the weird dead body.
Because, I mean, he was born in 1949, and most of the stories, most of the information we have about his childhood was, like, family friends, like, telling stories of his childhood, you know? Because neither of his parents are alive anymore, like, you know, so... And I don't know that David Smith has ever, not David Smith, David Pickton has come forward and, like, I don't think he's defended or incriminated Robert Pickton's, like, at all. So, as far as I know.
So the other thing I'm thinking of is if Pickton as a child was, like, had a mental disability or, like, a physical disability, it could be, like, that could have been why he was, like, targeted by his parents' bullying.
Yeah.
That happens a lot.
That was kind of what I was getting at when I said, oh, he might have been a problem child. Like, a lot of times, especially if you have siblings, I've seen this in, like, other true crime cases where there's kind of, like, the one kid who maybe was, like Abby was saying, like, maybe was a little slow or just wasn't living up to their ideas of what their kid should be or what their other kids were. And so they were treated differently and then possibly, like, abused too. I don't know, emotionally or physically, whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Lynn Ellingson, a witness at the trial later, said she had caught Pickton skinning a hanging woman, but she had been too afraid to come forward at the time. She admittedly had used this knowledge to blackmail Pickton several times. So she basically, like, caught him doing this and didn't say anything about it to the police. But she blackmailed him a couple times and was like, you know, I'm going to tell that you were skinning a woman from a tree who was hanging. Like, I'm going to tell somebody about that if you don't do XYZ for me. So
hold on,
and she admitted to this.
Crazy if she was doing that. Like, oh yeah, I don't even.
That lady, was she also a sex worker? Like,
no, she was, I think, like, a neighbor or a friend who happened to be on the property.
I was gonna say,
I would assume that they were fairly close if she was on the property.
Because if she was also a sex worker, that would explain why she wouldn't have gone to the police. Because, I mean, that's for the same reason why the other sex worker, like, nothing came of that issue.
Like,
so
justice, yeah,
I don't know.
So Robert Pickton was arrested on February 22nd, 2002, after police executed a search warrant, finally, on the farm he and his siblings owned.
Hold on. So he was born in 49, so this man's 53. And I'm assuming most of his adult life he's been doing some messed up stuff.
Dude, that was such fast math. Holy cow.
50. 49 plus 1 is 50 plus 2 is 53.
What? I'm not gonna
Big brain energy.
Big brain energy. So they initially were looking for illegal firearms that they had report. So like that's weird to me that they were finally like, let's go look around. You might have illegal guns. Like
it almost seems like he might have had like the family might have had a connection to the police department. They were like, no, he's normal.
I doubt it though. Like I doubt it. They were definitely like outcasts as far as I understand.
So you were Caitlin, you were saying this is kind of like a small town, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've heard, I mean, for me, at least in my experience of like true crime cases, it's not completely unheard of for like a small town police department to kind of push stuff under the rug to kind of avoid being in the news.
Keep the peace. Yeah, keep the peace. Totally.
And like avoid being in the news for something that would basically coin that town as the Pickton murder town or whatever, you know what I mean?
Abby said cough small town murder, which I feel like that's like the whole podcast.
Their whole premise is like small towns are notorious for like missing evidence, not investigating evidence. Like that is the whole premise of their podcast.
Yeah, and so like part of that is from like lack of resources, I think. But then the other part is like being like willfully ignorant and saying like, oh, we don't want anyone to know. Yeah, and also I think that like the way they got in by saying, oh, we think you have illegal firearms was again kind of a way for them to like get in but not really stir the pot, like not come out and straight up say, okay, so we're pretty sure that you're murdering people. Like I mean, I don't know, maybe I guess they didn't know at that point. I guess that's possible, but I feel like it's like everyone in the town knew that something weird was going on there, and it wasn't.
A couple people had like realized that something was weird going on, and yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, weird.
So, like I said, they were initially looking for illegal firearms, but they actually discovered an inhaler owned by a missing woman from Vancouver on the property, and so they executed a second search warrant. Like they got a second search warrant for, I would assume, more areas of the property. Originally, Pickton was held on illegal firearms possession, but he was released and rearrested about a week later. This time, he was charged with the deaths of Serena Abbotsway and Mona Wilson. On April 2nd, the deaths of Jacqueline McDonald, Diane Rock, and Heather Bottomley were added. 2 more were added within the next week for Andrea Joesbury and Brenda Wolfe. Pickton was at this point charged with 7 first-degree murders. Later that year, Pickton became one of the most notorious Canadian serial killers of all time when his murder charges grew to 15, with the additions of Georgina Papin, Patricia Johnson, Helen Hallmark, and Jennifer Firminger, and then 2 weeks later, the murders of Heather Chinock, Tanya Hollick, Sherry Irving, and Inga Hall.
So I have to say, that's not very Canadian of him. And I think that might be why, like, because you know...
What do you mean not Canadian of it?
Canadians are notorious for being ridiculously nice.
Oh, I see.
And so, like, I'm just thinking, like, maybe that's why he's like them, because we have serial killers with upwards of 100 victims.
Yeah.
And so, to me, it's like, well, it's Canada. So maybe their people just aren't as... much assholes as America.
This is the worst thing that's ever happened in Canada is these murders, basically.
Right, because
I mean, this is a big deal. I think Robert Pickton is kind of more or less like our Ted Bundy.
Yeah, I could see that.
Or their Ted Bundy.
I was going to ask if there is any, like, did you find any similarities with all of his victims or not really?
A majority of them were sex workers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cough Gary Widgway.
Yeah,
I kind of had a feeling that was going to be the case, but I think it was
like an opportunistic thing because again, he had drugs and alcohol and he didn't consume them, but he was like offering them to people, you know.
So was it ever determined that he had like a mental disability or
I don't know that he was
one?
diagnosed with one, but he was very slow in school. So I think we can assume that he had some kind of developmental
just
display.
academically though, not
Academically,
necessarily
I don't know for sure socially.
Okay.
It seems like he was socially inept enough
to host parties
and to at least get women to come to his property, you know,
so
like at the very least.
It's possible
he had those social abilities,
academic.
you know. So excavations were continued at the farm through November 2003. The total cost of this whole thing was around $70 million by the end of 2003. So within like 2 years, a little bit less than 2 years, they had spent about $70 million like looking for human remains on his property. The police reportedly brought out like conveyor belts and sifters to try to find remains that were like in the dirt.
Well, because he would have had to be doing something with the bones. You can't, because he was feeding them to the pigs, right?
I mean, there's obviously no proof of that, but
that's
like
speculation.
Yeah. So it is rumored that he fed most of the remains to the pigs, or ground them up. He had like a meat grinder on site as well. There was also like an alleged
and then fed them to the pigs probably.
There was like an alleged like little tidbit that a small batch of human flesh was incorporated into a batch of ground pork that was given to family and friends. This was never confirmed. It'd be almost impossible to confirm it now, but so all buildings on the property are currently like demolished. Like they demolished them after they found like essentially as much evidence as they could. Overall, the remains or DNA of 33 women were found on the property. So like 33 different identifiable like DNA profiles.
So at least 33.
At least 33. And this is, I mean, in theory, a pig could eat everything because pigs can eat the bones too, is my understanding. So
how they must have stronger stomachs than like most animals, because I know dogs, you have to be careful because they can like raw chicken bones can like cut dog stomachs, and so I guess maybe they have a thicker stomach. That's a random tidbit, but I didn't know that they could eat bones.
Well, like pigs are kind of scary because they'll eat anything you give them.
Well, like, so it's interesting because we were just talking about how he mentally was kind of slow, but I mean, if he thought up like this kind of like really gruesome evil scheme, like he must have been thinking about it, you know? Like he must not have been that stupid if it is true.
Yeah.
If it is true that he was like, oh, I live on a pig farm, I can like, you know what I mean? Like, I know that sounds disgusting and horrible to even think about, but clear. And that's actually the case, and how I feel about a lot of different serial killers too, is like a lot of them have very similar like upbringings, and they were academically slow, they didn't do very well in school, whatever, and then they end up being serial killers. And that's how I feel about a lot of them. I'm like, maybe they're really not, they weren't as slow as
people thought they were. Yeah,
like it was almost like a trick kind of,
and
ruse, especially what Abby was saying too about like socially he clearly was not that bad because he had these huge parties with people. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
So
yeah,
weird.
Agreed.
But it definitely a common thread in a lot of like prolific serial killers.
Yeah, is that they like appear to be slow, but they're like not actually, you know? So May 26, 2005, 12 more charges were laid against Pickton for the killings of Kara Ellis, Andrea Borhaven, Deborah Lynn Jones, Marnie Frey, Tiffany Drew, Carrie Koski, Sarah DeVries, Cynthia Felix, Angela Jardine, Wendy Crawford, Diana Melnick, and Jane Doe, which is like an unidentified one. Her name wasn't actually Jane Doe. I feel like if you know about True Crime Podcasts, you could probably assume that. But anyway, this brings the total number of first-degree murder charges to 27. So technically, the trial began on January 30th, 2006 in New Westminster. On January 22nd, 2007, Robert Pickton faced first-degree murder charges of 6 women. So it took him like about a year to do like the discovery phase and to kind of figure out like how many how many cases they could actually charge him for, you know, like, did they have remains of all these bodies? Like, you know, remains talk as far as presenting things to a jury. So the additional 20 charges were going to be tried at a later trial, as it was determined a trial with 26 individual murder charges would have led to a lengthy trial for the jury and would likely lead to a mistrial, because they would have had to prove 26 different murders. So they were going to split it up. So they're going to do 6 initially and then 20 later. Don't know why they didn't do it halfsies, but that's how they did it. So the 27th charge of the Jane Doe, remember from what I listed before, was dropped due to lack of evidence and the fact that Pickton refused to plea to it. I mean, technically they still found an unidentified woman's remains on his property, but I think there was like less they could convince the jury of with that one is the thing. On this date, the media was finally allowed to disclose the terrifying details of Pickton's crimes. So up until then, they had like can't remember the exact name of it, but like the media wasn't allowed to talk. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the media wasn't allowed to talk to mostly because they didn't want the jury to be influenced.
It's like the OJ case when they had them all in that hotel, remember? So.
Yeah. So during the next month, evidence from Pickton's farm was presented to the court. Some notable pieces of evidence that were brought into the courtroom are a loaded .22 revolver with a black spiky dildo attached to the barrel.
Huh? Like, are you joking?
No. So Pickton said in a video that he had used this to make like a makeshift silencer.
A dildo.
Yeah.
Why? But Robert, you just skipped past the part where you had a black spiky dildo just laying around.
Yeah, I mean,
in your toolbox.
My toolbox. The revolver had 1 round fired out of it, and there was DNA of 1 victim on this weapon. So
great.
He got over his kinky silencer phase.
Yeah, that's just weird.
There was also skulls cut in half, with hands and feet stuffed inside of them. All of these are skeletal remains. There was a remains inside a garbage bag at the bottom of a trash bin. A photo of these remains of Mona Wilson was shown to the jury. So there was actually like in the trash bin, a bag on top, and then the bottom bag had Mona Wilson's remains in it. A jawbone and teeth were found buried beside the slaughterhouse. From his trailer that he lived in, boxes of .357 Magnum handgun ammunition, night vision goggles, 2 pairs of faux fur-lined handcuffs, a syringe with 3 milliliters of blue liquid inside, and then Spanish fly aphrodisiac. I couldn't exactly find out what Spanish fly. It's like a plant that has natural aphrodisiac properties. I couldn't figure out like why he would have this or how he would have acquired it. Maybe I just didn't look hard enough, but it was like a mood enhancer.
A natural aphrodisiac.
Yeah.
What was the one before that?
A syringe with 3 milliliters of blue liquid inside.
Don't know what it is.
No, just some blue liquid.
So I was gonna say, because we talked a little bit about how it's kind of speculated that he fed his victims to his pigs, which is disgusting. Sorry, I had to bring it up again. But based on what like this kind of bullet point list of stuff you're giving us with like there was some skulls cut in half and then there was like the trash bag, like I'm wondering if
how long he was doing this for,
or like if he actually was feeding them the remains to the pigs, or like why he was only feeding some remains to the pigs.
Well, it
like
seems very random and disorganized.
Yeah, it was almost like in the moment, like when he had a moment to kill somebody and like try to get rid of their like body, it was like he wasn't thinking.
Like it was like whatever works. So I think the chances are high that he fed somebody to the pigs.
Yeah.
But like
But does that make sense what
Yeah,
I'm saying? I don't know.
yeah,
Mhm.
the remains are like everywhere, and so
And there's
there's
like
no
some of them,
organization in his
yeah,
MO.
I mean, the skulls cut in half with hands and feet stuffed inside. Like that's
That's
weirdly
so
specific.
specific.
Like I'm confused at this point.
Well,
Like
so
what?
there was definitely victims that they didn't find the remains of, 100%.
Oh, for
Well, so
sure.
that's what I'm saying. It's like
There's
some
like
of
a quote
them.
from him that I'll get to, but
It's like maybe he. I don't know. I don't want to like speculate a ton, I guess, but maybe like in the moment, if he could quickly get rid of the body, like and feed it to a pig, if it was feeding time, I don't know. It's just weird.
a videotape of Pickton's friend Scott Chubb saying Pickton had told him a good way to kill a female heroin addict was to inject her with windshield washer fluid,
So that's
which
what it
is
was.
blue.
That's
Indeed.
the blue liquid. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's horrible.
So basically, like, this is a video of Scott Chubb like testifying that Pickton had told him to, like, oh, you can kill a heroin addict by injecting her with windshield washer fluid. A second tape was played in which an associate named Andrew Bellwood said Pickton mentioned killing prostitutes by handcuffing and strangling them, then bleeding and gutting them before feeding them to pigs.
Ew.
So he had admitted to a lot of people that he was doing some weird shit, and so few people came forward. It's kind of disgusting. But here again, it's likely that people just like didn't believe him. They're like,
That's
this
what I was
dude's
gonna
probably just
say.
talking out his ass,
I was like, didn't you mention that they were kind of like the weird rejects of the town? Like maybe people were like, oh, there's Robert talking about weird shit again. I don't know.
So
Maybe.
I don't know for sure if David Smith was as much of an outcast as Robert Pickton. Not David Smith. Why do I keep calling him David Smith? David Pickton. I don't know where I'm getting that. Like, he didn't seem like as much of an outcast as Robert. Like, Robert is giving me a lot more of like, I don't know, he was like the weird smelly kid in high school that nobody wanted to date,
Right.
So there was also lab staff that testified that about 80 unique DNA profiles were found on the property, roughly half female and half male. So they only found remains of 33, but there was like DNA present from about 80 different people. A lot of these people, it could be from like his parties that he was throwing. So during trial, there was a video also shown of Robert Pickton telling a undercover cop who was posing as a cellmate that he had murdered 49 women and wished he could have made it an even 50 before he got caught. He's like saying this while like laughing and giggling, and he's like eating a bowl of chili in the undercover footage. During trial, it was announced that the cellmate was actually an undercover agent. He also says that he would have killed another 25 women perhaps, and admits that he was only caught because he got sloppy. And that's his word, is sloppy.
So maybe, I mean, kind of based on what I was saying like just a little bit ago, maybe that's why there are like some remains that were found, and then there are like some that weren't found because they were fed to the pigs. Like maybe that's when he was in his mind like being very clean and precise about it, and then he got quote unquote sloppy when he kind of was like, oh crap, what do I do, and like just like buried something, or you know what I mean? I don't know. It's like maybe
so that's the thing, like a lot of it he was dismembering them to hide them, like crushed skulls with other skeletal remains inside of them. There was a bag full of body parts that he had dismembered. Like, it sounds like he very well would have just kept doing this, unless they had happened to find that asthma inhaler that one time. Like, so during trial, defense attorneys attempted to portray Robert Pickton as dim-witted, although he clearly understood the trouble he was in. Like, he is quoted as saying in an interrogation tape, quote, "They're going to nail me to the cross," end quote. So he like knew that like he was on trial for murder. Like,
exactly my point, that
he wasn't dumb.
That stupid. Like he wasn't. Yeah, he knew what he was doing. So that's good, I guess, that everyone agreed on that. Like they knew that he wasn't. He might have been slow but he wasn't like, I don't know how to say this, but
maybe he was academically slow, but like
yeah, like
he knew what he was doing, and he knew enough to know that like murder was wrong because he hid evidence, you know?
Exactly, because there are cases, you know, occasionally where like someone is seriously so like inebriated, I guess, would that be the right word?
Yeah.
Like mentally not there.
Oh, well, inebriated would mean they're like under the influence of something, but
so they're so mentally,
I don't know what you're.
I don't know
Yeah.
either. It's late in the day for me. Anyway, my point is that in some cases there are people that are so stupid, I'll just say stupid, that it could be argued that they didn't know really what they were doing, or they didn't understand the gravity of their actions. But this is not a case like that, because like you said, he hid the evidence. And like oftentimes in cases where there are people that like don't really understand what they're doing, they're not committing multiple murders.
Oh,
right?
totally.
Like it's like a one-time thing, and like most of the time they immediately like confess to it. They don't usually cover it up or anything. So yeah,
Oh, totally.
I'm glad that the jury and like the judge and everybody, like the legal system, agreed with that, because
he wasn't as slow as they were trying to make him seem.
He deserves to
totally.
be in jail forever.
So December 9th, 2007, this is just like a month shy of 8 years since 7 years. 2002, 2007. Just shy of 6 years from the time that he was arrested. So December 9th, 2007, the jury found Pickton not guilty on all counts of first-degree murder, but found him guilty of second-degree murder instead. In Canada, this can mean automatic life in prison without possibility of parole for up to 25 years. That's like the max sentence. But also like the automatic sentence, I guess, if that makes sense. Justice James Williams read 18 victim impact statements, so from the families of the victims, and finally handed down the sentence of life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years on December 11th, 2007. At this time, this was the maximum possible sentence for second-degree murder under Canada law. Williams called the crimes, quote, senseless and despicable. This sentence is identical to one he would have received if the jury had convicted him on first-degree murder, because he got like basically like the highest possible sentence for second-degree murder. So he would have got the same thing if they found him guilty of first degree. So he can get
out on parole after 25 years?
In theory.
He probably won't.
There were a lot of people unhappy that he didn't get first-degree murder, because I think it's possible that he wouldn't have gotten...
He would be ineligible for parole.
Well, I mean, it's the same sentence that he would have gotten if he got first-degree murder, but people were unhappy he got first-degree murder, probably for the same reasons that you and I and all the listeners are unhappy.
Well, yeah.
So the Crown appealed in January 2008 on grounds that the judge insufficiently gave the jury instructions, and then on evidentiary rulings made by the judge, and on the fact that the original trial of 26 murders was severed into 6 and 20. So all of these were like their reasons that there should be a new trial. The Crown says, so the Crown is like the government of Canada.
Right,
that's what it's called.
Technically. Mm-hmm.
So the Crown says this was strategic in case the defense tried to call for another trial, so that the Crown this time had the ability to try Pickton for all 26 at once. So my understanding is that they filed an appeal before the defense could, so that they could show, hey, we appealed the splitting up of the murders. So if you want a retrial, we're going to charge him for all 26, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It was like, what's the word I use? Strategic.
Mm-hmm.
If they hadn't filed an appeal about the splitting up of the charges, they would likely not have grounds to recombine them if another trial, if there was a retrial. So 2 days after the Crown's appeal, the defense appealed on similar grounds. So June 25th, 2009, the Court of Appeals denied the defense's appeal, but did leave Pickton open to appeal to the Supreme Court. They agreed that the judge should not have split up the 26 charges, but stayed the findings so that the conviction still stood for the 6 second-degree convictions. So he can never be found innocent of those 6 convictions, but technically he could be retried or he could appeal to the Supreme Court. He mostly would be appealing his sentence at that point. In 2010, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled to confirm Pickton's conviction and said that the judge's reinstruction of the jury on Pickton's culpability if he was not the sole perpetrator of the crimes was justified. So I think I didn't mention this like 100%, but there was like a little bit of a hiccup where a jury member towards the end of the trial asked if Pickton was still responsible if he wasn't the sole perpetrator of the crime. And that was like a point of contention on like whether or not the judge gave the correct instructions. But the Supreme Court of Canada said that the judge was in their right to say that. So Robert Pickton is serving time in a federal penitentiary as of August 2010 and is up for parole in 2032. I totally meant to look up if he's dead yet, and I forgot.
He's old.
He's old. He's really old.
49.
Nope. Yep. He's still old.
So he's
71.
Like, I almost was going to say almost 100 because I thought he was born in
1949.
Okay, so he's not as old as I thought, but
yeah, he's still alive.
He's old enough that, I mean, it's safe to say that like he's going to die in prison. Like he'll never die.
He is technically up for parole in 2032 though.
He could make it out, but prison's pretty hard on the human.
The thing is I don't think so. By 2032, how old will he be?
Me?
How old will he be?
She's like, you better watch out.
83.
83.
50 plus 32 plus 1.
Yeah. Well, Canada has really good healthcare, so who knows?
Maybe their prison system is better.
I'm imagining it's better. I can't imagine any judge would grant him parole, though.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Because it just means he's eligible.
Yeah.
Like that just means that's the soonest he's eligible. He still has to apply. Yeah. Exactly.
And also like it doesn't, I'm kind of reading ahead in the notes, but it doesn't seem like he, a lot of times people may get parole because they've like confessed and kind of come to terms with their crime and have, whether or not you believe them, they understand that their crimes were horrible and they've apologized and they've like kind of moved forward with their life, like turn over a new leaf or whatever the saying.
Yeah, totally.
And it does not sound like Robert has done that, so I doubt he'll never see the light of day. I think he'll die in prison.
Well, and that's the thing. Like I think when people start to get to the end and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm going to die in prison," I'm sure they'll say like just about anything to get parole. Like, you know what I mean? But the fact that he said to an undercover cop, like, I definitely would have kept killing. Like, I wanted to make it an even 50. I would have killed 25 more people. Like, you know. So he will likely never be tried for the additional 20 murders because this would not affect his current sentence at all. The stay of the 20 murder charges that he wasn't charged for. So a stay is basically like, it like cancels any future trials essentially. Like it's not closing the case and it's not bringing the case to trial. It's like somewhere in the middle. So the official stay of these charges was handed down by the Crown Counsel, Melissa Gillespie, on August 4th, 2010. And like around this time is when he actually got transferred to a federal penitentiary. He was in some kind of like county jail up until then. So Robert Pickton has always maintained his innocence, and he has allegedly expressed concern about the expanse of the, not the expense. He's allegedly expressed concern about the expense of the investigation, particularly in letters he allegedly wrote to an alias of a budding Fremont, California journalist who had written him in jail in August 2006. In these letters, Pickton also allegedly references the Bible. So these are just kind of letters that like a journalist or somebody posing as a journalist like sent him in jail, and he is basically saying like, you know, God is the final judge, and you know, like they've spent so much money on this investigation but I didn't do it, and yada yada yada, you know. So this year the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, moved to destroy all of the evidence that was collected for this case because it would likely never be needed for later prosecution, as well as a lot of it was unable to ever be returned to like a rightful owner. So like next of kin or whatever. So this is standard practice according to the RCMP. It was denied, and the motion was denied. The normal time frame for evidence disposal is around 80 years. It's kind of weird that they like rushed to dispose of this evidence, to be honest, because obviously don't keep it for ever, but the normal time frame is like 80 years apparently. So anyway, yeah, that's Robert Pickton. That's the pig farmer killer of Canada. Most notorious serial killer in Canada.
Disgusting.
Or at least one of the most. Yeah.
No,
kind of gross to think about the idea of like somebody, I mean, obviously murder is like absolutely disgusting, but like the idea of like feeding a human body to a pig, like, I don't know, it's a little makes you like a little shiver go down your spine,
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. I just feel, for all of like the families of the victims, and especially, I mean, we've talked about Gary Ridgway too, and he also killed a lot of sex workers and people who they thought didn't, like have any like support system, or no one really cared. And so it's rough. It's horrible that happened again, like in another case. And again, like you said, if it is true that he fed them to the pigs, which I'm pretty sure it is based on what he has apparently told everyone in town about, it's pretty rough.
His boldness is crazy to me. Like, this man truly thought nobody would ever catch him,
That's
but
typical.
honestly, all murderers, I feel like, think nobody's ever going to catch him. But
so typical, like serial killer vibe, to like basically be so narcissistic that you don't care. Like you truly don't believe that anyone will ever find out. It's crazy.
So I'm just gonna list off the cases that he was convicted of, the 6 women that he was convicted of. So the first count was Serena Abbotsway. She was 29 when she disappeared in August 2001. So yeah, and then so count 2 was Mona Lee Wilson. This is the girl they found in the trash can. Sorry, the woman that they found in the trash can. She was 26 when she went to her doctor on November 30th, 2001, and was reported missing later that night. Count 6, they're listed in like, I believe, order that they charged him with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why it skips a couple of numbers. So count 6 was Andrea Joesbury, age 22, when last seen in June 2001, and she was reported missing June 8th of 2001, just before Abby's birthday, before you were born.
Yep. Oh, wow. Yeah, same year. Oh my gosh, I'm a baby.
Count 7 was Brenda Ann Wolfe, age 32, when last seen in February 1999. She was reported missing April 25th, 2000. Again, she was a sex worker, most likely. So a couple of these were sex workers. So the thing with serial killers that target sex workers is they do it because they don't think anybody's going to miss them, which is terrible. So count 16 is Marnie Lee Frey, last seen August 1997, reported missing on December 29th, 1997. And then count 11, Georgina Faith Papin, last seen in January 1999, reported missing in March 2001. So those were the 6 that he was convicted of. There's a lot, so I'm not going to read like all of them because it's a lot. And then there is a couple cases that, like I said, these are not ones that he has been charged with, but he very likely did them. Marianne Clark, aka Nancy Greek, 25, who disappeared in August 1991 from downtown Victoria. Yvonne Mary Bowen, she was 33 when she was last seen on March 16th, 2001. Dawn Teresa Cray, reported missing in December 2000. Cray is the main subject of a 2006 documentary film about murdered and missing Aboriginal women in Canada. It is called Finding Dawn. She's believed to be a victim of Robert Pickton. And then there are also 2 unidentified women that, because of like the time frame and other like extenuating circumstances, they believe that Robert Pickton did it as well. So again, like a little bit of like newer update to the case is the victims' children filed like a civil lawsuit collectively in May 2013 against the Vancouver Police Department, the RCMP, and the Crown for failing to protect the victims.
Good.
They reached a settlement in March 2014, and each of the children received $50,000. But they technically didn't admit to liability. They still compensated them, but there was no admission of liability. So yeah, anyway, that wraps up our episode on Robert William Pickton, the pig farmer killer. We'd love to hear what you guys think. Go ahead and leave us a comment if you're listening on YouTube, or go ahead and follow us on Instagram at Who What Where Podcast. We're going to post some fun, well, quote unquote fun pictures about this case, and you can always DM us there, give us a follow, like, and comment on some of our previous posts. And we will see you guys on Friday. Thanks so much for listening.